Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's your boy Christian, aka I Hate You Dior. I was doing a little thinking today about UFC because there's been a couple of big changes happening in the background. You guys didn't know, Belal Muhammad did pull out of UFC 310, unfortunately, so I'm not gonna be able to see the GOAT Belal Muhammad defend his belt against Shavkat Rakhmonov. But to quell my spirits and make me a little happier, UFC announced short man Joaquin Buckley versus racially motivated Brazilian Ian Gary for UFC Tampa later this year in a matchup that can only be summed up as hashtag Buck versus Cuck. And this week we have UFC Edmonton with Brendan Moreno versus Amir Albazi. And after that, we have the most exciting fight night of the year, Neil Magny versus Carlos Prates. Guys, I can't wait for that. I know you at home can't wait for that. That got me thinking. We've had some really good events this year. We just came off of UFC 308. We had UFC 300 back in April, and we've had some shitty ones, man. We've had, UFC 297. We've had UFC 307. It seems to be 7 is the unlucky number in cases like this. But in this video, I particularly want to go over my favorite pay-per-views of the year and some of the pay-per-views I think that aren't so good. Going based off this tier list I have made here, we're going to be going from worst to best, starting off with, in my opinion, the worst pay-per-view of 2024. UFC 297. Sean Strickland defending his belt against Dricus du Plessis. This was probably one of the hardest cards to watch in real time. And if you guys don't know, I do watch every single UFC event. I plan on waking up early to watch UFC Macau when they do that. And I am going to be watching UFC Edmonton. So yes, I do watch every single UFC event. I have no social life on Saturdays. That being said though, UFC 297. What is there to not to say? What is there to say? Bad event, horrible, boring prelims, really no interesting fighters outside of the main event. When I rank the status of a UFC card, my biggest thing is how entertaining is it from start to finish, because I do like to sit there and enjoy the entire card. I know a lot of people do as well. How good are the prelims? How good are the early prelims? How good is the main card? How good is the co-main, the main event? How good is the build-up? How exciting is the promotion for the fight? UFC 297 had really none of those other than maybe a really good main event. Build-up for this card was not the best. The promotion was pretty bad. The press conference wasn't the most entertaining thing in the world, and you'd think with Sean Strickland there, he would try to bring out some form of entertainment, but he did try to make some kind of peace treaty with Dricus in the press conference. And other than that, there weren't really any vocal personalities at this event. Early prelims and prelims were not good at all. And then it wasn't going up from there once you got to the main card, starting off with Mosvar versus Arnold Allen in what was a very, very tricky robbery decision, in my opinion. Marc-Andre Barriault versus Chris Curtis, which was a fight that happened. And then we had my GOAT, Neil Magny versus Mike Malott. And what can only be described as Neil Magny losing maybe the first 75% of the fight. And then Mike Malott gasses out in the third and gets TKO'd in what is probably the funniest fraud check of all time. Once you got to the co-main event, it was the most boring 5-round women's decision of all time, with Mayra Bueno Silva versus Raquel Pennington. And then we got to the main event, which was Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis. The only highlight of this card, the only fun fight, the only good fight, really, the only entertainment I found from this, and a lot of other people did at home too, and was really the only value in watching this card. So I rank this card down at number 12, which is the bottom of my list. Going on to UFC 302, Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. This card felt pretty rushed and sloppy because there were a lot of fights getting added last minute. And overall, as a whole, this main event wasn't really the most thought out. Because they needed a fight for Islam Makhachev, they approached Dustin Poirier, who was the only one coming off of a win with a reasonable amount of time to prepare. And they gave him the fight, even though the fight should have probably went to someone like a Max Holloway or even a Arman Sarukian, who was offered the fight after UFC 300 but declined it because it wasn't a quick enough turnaround. So they went with Dustin Poirier, who had a really good showing in their fight, but that was the most I can say for this card. It was a good main event opener on there with Randy Brown versus Zaleski dos Santos. Other than that, not the best card at all. Main card had Nico Price versus Alex Morono 2, the rematch, just so you guys know. Boring stinker of decision. Then we had Mikhailo Lajacek versus Kevin Holland, where Kevin Holland looked like he was going to lose and then latches up the most bullshit submission, so that was that. And then we had Sean Strickland versus Paulo Costa, which was 5 rounds of just Sean Strickland It was 5 rounds of that, right? One judge gave the full fight to Paulo Costa, which was so weird. And at the end, Sean Strickland did turn up and try throwing spinning, jumping head kicks. So yeah, that was a fight that happened. And because of it, Sean Strickland wants to get a rematch for his belt. But after what Hamzat did, that's not looking like it's a go anytime soon. Early prelims and prelims were pretty boring as well. We had Jake Matthews versus Phil Rowe, Basil Hafez versus Mickey Gall, Roman Kopylov versus Cesar Almeida, Grant Dawson, Joe Selecki. Not the most high-value fights, not the most entertaining fights in the world. Quite literally a fucking card full of decisions. I believe there was only 2 or 3 finishes on here. One of them was from Islam Makhachev, and another one from Jailton Almeida, who fought big man Alexander Romanov and just choked him out in the first. So yeah, UFC 302, not a good card. Really good main event, fun fight in the main event, but that is really all the card had. One thing I will say, however, though, which is why I put 302 over 297, 302 was promoted very well. The build up to the fight was really fun, and as a watching experience, it wasn't as bad as UFC 297, even though some of the fights were boring. Next, UFC 305. Now this one sucks because UFC could have really done really well when it came to promoting this fight. You had Israel Adesanya versus Dricus, which was probably the biggest bad blood matchup they could do at middleweight since Robert Whittaker got knocked out by Dricus, and Izzy went into the cage and cursed out Dricus in a drunken rant, which I think everyone has seen at this point. Australian card full of Australian fighters, where literally every single Australian fighter for the most part lost, similar to UFC 297 where all the Canadian fighters lost. No entertainment really in the prelims, couple of boring fights. You had Ricardo Ramos, Joshua Culibao, Junior Tafa versus Walter Walker in the battle to see who's the worst brother out the 2. Only entertainment to come up from that fight was when Junior Tafa smacked Walter Walker, and then Walter Walker said he was going to end the Tafa bloodline. That was the only real entertainment to come out of that fight. They also had Jack Jenkins and Herbert Burns, which was one of the funniest fights you could ever watch because it was just Herbert Burns doing nothing and getting beat up and then getting carried out the cage by Gilbert Burns. So for those 2 things alone, this stands above the last 2 cards I mentioned. And the main card was really fun as well, and the lead up to it was also really fun too. The embedded episodes were good. You had Rosenstrike Tuivasa, which was pretty boring, but then good fights like Christian Leroy Duncan versus RoboCop, Dan Hooker versus Gamrot, and an amazing performance from Dan Hooker. My boy Stevie Urseg got knocked out by Cara France, but you know, it's the game we play. And then once again, the main event saved this card from jumping off of a cliff and being forgettable. So yeah, all the Australian fighters lost. No really entertaining or good fights outside of the main card. UFC fumbled the bag on the build-up. Just a lot of missed opportunities with this card. Could have been a lot worse though, I will say, compared to the last 2 I spoke about. So that's why I'm putting this one at number 10. The next one I wanted to talk about was UFC 307, one that actually happened earlier this month. Frustrating bunch of prelims. A lot of weird reffing decisions. There was the Cesar Almeida, Ihor Portera fight, which got broken up every couple of seconds. That was funny to watch. Main event was not the most entertaining. You had Mario Batista and Jose Aldo, which you guys already know that fight. You probably have seen a million people talk about it, but Mario Batista deserves to fight Tom Aspinall and Alex Pereira with both his hands tied behind his back for that performance. Joaquin Buckley, Wonderboy, was hilarious too because Joaquin Buckley was getting his head knocked back every time Stephen Wonderboy Thompson touched him, and then knocked him out with a jumping, flying overhand. So that was a good fight. Kevin Holland literally quit and gave up in his fight off of an injury. And then the women's co-main fight between Raquel Pennington and Juliana Pena was hilarious to say the least. But for a women's fight, it was actually one of the most entertaining women fights you could have seen this year. So because of that, and because of some of the highs of this card, I am gonna put it above the other ones. And for the fact that the main event was fucking spectacular. Oh my goodness. Take away the main event, you have the worst pay-per-view of the entire year. That's how good this main event was. When I tell you the Alex Pereira-Carrillo Roundtree fight had me on the edge of my seat the entire time watching it, I laughed, I cried, I screamed, I got mad, I got happy. It was a mix of emotions. Wonderful fight from both men. Insane finish, insane performance, insane pace from the both of them. Literally the only reason I'm putting this above all the other cards I mentioned. Take this away and you have the worst pay-per-view of the year. But solid main event. Joaquin Buckley's performance was pretty cool too. That was it. That was really, you know, the whole card. Oh, and the co-main event was pretty funny. So I'll give that to UFC 307. Now, we've gotten kind of out of the slop, I like to say. We're going into what I like to call the good cards of the year. Starting off with UFC 298. Really good main event, really good main card. You had Whitaker and Costa, Merab, Henry Cejudo, Ian Gary, Jeff Neal, which was a bit of a stinker, but then you had before Anthony Hernandez, Roman Kopylov. Prelims were funny. We had the last minute replacement between Junior and Justin Tafa, where they literally swapped the couple of hours before the weigh-ins, and the guys leg brutally chewed up by Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Prelims weren't horrible, but they weren't a lot of really entertaining fights on there either, but there were some really good standouts. Brinya Nakamura was really good, and he was on that card. Amanda Lemos, Mackenzie Dern was a really good fight too for it being a women's fight. And then the main event, you know, my boy Volk got knocked out, but still a good fight nonetheless. And on top of that too, some of the prelims just weren't that good, so I'm not going to put this highly. But the main card was pretty solid. Through and through, one of the more solid main cards of the year out of all these pay-per-views I'm talking about so far. Another pay-per-view with a really solid main card, UFC 304. Solid prelim. Some of the fights were a bit hard to get through and were a bit longer, but a lot of the prelims were bangers. You had the Mick Parkin fight where he knocked the dude out in the first round. Nathaniel Wood, Daniel Pineda was a really fun fight. Bruno Brazil, Molly McCann was a really fun fight too. Amazing main card. Arnold Allen, Giga Chikadze, wonderful fun fight. RoboCop, CLD, really good entertaining fight too from both men. Paddy Pimblett, Bobby Green. Guys, this fucking fight and the build up to it was incredible too. When Paddy walked into the cage, he had incredible amounts of aura, and the same can be said for Tom Aspinall when he walked out. Both men finished their opponent in the first round with Paddy getting a armbar submission over Bobby Green. Tom Aspinall just putting the beats on Curtis Blades in the first round. And then you had Bilal Muhammad, Leon Edwards too. Now my GOAT Bilal won the belt, did his thing. Remember the decision? 50-45, you know? Edwards shit the bed, looked pretty scared. Was in the embedded episodes looking like a clown. The build up to this card was also really fun too. A lot of aura going into those main three fights. Bilal was talking shit and literally every chance he got. Paddy Pimblett and Bobby Green were talking shit to each other. The embedded episodes were really, really entertaining too. I rarely ever really watch a full 5-episode embedded series, but for this one it was really entertaining to watch because there was a lot of cool moments like Bilal and Leon running into each other at the elevator, Bilal and Leon running into each other outside of the elevator.
I remember the name. Come on, boys.
Paddy Pimblett trying to lose weight, Bobby Green walking the streets of London. So it was a lot of good moments, you know, nothing crazy. My boy Tom, heavyweight GOAT, coming for that strap. John Jones, you better retire. And then Bilal Muhammad, Leon Edwards stunk it up. So if it literally wasn't for, I mean, honestly, I can't even say nothing bad about the main event because it was Bilal Muhammad making it a Bilal Muhammad fight. The prelims weren't that good, but there were some really good standouts, which is why I'm not putting this a lot higher. But as a card in general, watching it, being there, building it up, just everything leading up to the fight was incredible. Also, that card did have Muhammad Mokaev and Manel Kape, which was a fight that happened in 2024. Let me tell you, the build up to this fight, I don't think I've ever been this excited to watch a flyweight fight ever, right? Manel Kape was out here beating up Muhammad Mokaev outside the PI, and then Muhammad Mokaev beats up Manel Kape at the Fighter Hotel in London, and then at the standoffs, they're just trying to fight each other right then and there. Before the fight happens, Manel Kape trying to fight him. So when you're going into the fight, you're thinking, oh, these guys are gonna kill each other. And then the fight happens. And there's nothing of that nature in the fight. And then Muhammad Mokaev got cut. So that was that fight. That was UFC 304. Now we're getting into the top 6, which is really the meat and potatoes, as I like to say. Really hard to pick how I would rank these top 6 because in my opinion, these top 6 cards are just really good through and throughout. But I looked at them, I looked at how I personally felt about them, and then I was able to rank them accordingly. At number 6, we have UFC 303. This card was originally supposed to be a completely different card, than what happened at the end, but I think that happening added to the build up and the hype for the card, because there was so much bullshit and random stuff happening leading up to the fight. Because first it was Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler, and then you have the promo videos, and then, oh my God, Conor McGregor's back. We're going to Ireland to do the press conference. And then they go to Ireland, and Conor doesn't come to Ireland. Then everyone's there, everyone's upset. Oh, Conor can't come. Couple of weeks after that, oh, Conor's pulled out, Alex Pereira's in. And then we had fucking Jamal Hill and Khalil Roundtree in the co-main event. Oh, Khalil Roundtree popped for steroids, so he can't fight. And now we're gonna have Carlos Ulberg fight Jamal Hill. And now Jamal Hill's injured, so we're gonna have Anthony Smith fight Carlos Ulberg. But now Carlos Ulberg is injured, so we're gonna have Anthony Smith fight Roman Dolidze. And then you can't just have Anthony Smith as the co-main event. So then they get Brian Ortega, Diego Lopez short notice. And then fucking an hour before the 30 minutes before the fight happens, fucking Dan Ige steps in, bro. Watching that shit in real time was nuts. Cause I'm just on Twitter watching the fight. I'm like, damn, motherfuckers are saying Ortega's out. And then you just hear John Anik, ladies and gentlemen, approaching to the octagon. We have, in a stunning turn of events, Brian Ortega's out, Dan Ige's in, and you're just like, oh shit. And then the fight ended up being really, really good. Close fight, competitive fight. The main event was spectacular. Alex Pereira put that pace on Yuri Prohaska. But this fight, man, this card had a couple of stinkers on it. You had Roman Dolidze, Anthony Smith. That fight sucked the fucking life out of me. Before that, you had Macy Chiasson versus Mayra Bueno Silva, which was a good competitive fight from both women. And then you had MVP Ian Gary, which was, that's when we got to meet mythical fighter, racially motivated Brazilian Ian Gary with the purple shorts on and everything. Took Michael Venom Page to a 30-27 with just his pure grappling. One of the most bullshit performances ever. So a lot of people's parlays because nobody expected Ian Gary to do that. So already we have two fights on the main card that just sucked the win. Co-main and main event were spectacular. And then the prelims, oh my God, the prelims were so good. Dean Silva and Charles Jourdain, Joe Pyfer, Marc-Andre Barriou, Peyton Talbot, Giannis Gamori, Cub Swanson, Andre Feely. Oh my God, these fucking prelims were good. And then early prelims, you got the Jillian Roberts fight. That was a good fight. They had on the early prelims, they had the Ray Soriwa fight, which that was an amazing performance from him. Ricky Simone and Vinicius Oliveira, which was an amazing way to open up the card. All in all, really, really, really good card. Couple of stinkers on it, but I feel like once you got a really good card, bare minimum, they need to have two stinkers, and that's what makes them special, because the main really good fights that stand out from the stinkers elevates the card as a whole, and it makes the experience better. I.e., co-main and main event, spectacular. Prelims were really fucking good. It was hard for me to put this one at number 6, but I remember the Anthony Smith-Roman Dolidze fight and how it made me want to stop watching the card entirely. I can't lie, right? Really good card though. All the bullshit that led up to it was honestly entertaining as well. So I'm gonna put that at number 6. And this was kind of hard for me, but Noche UFC 306. I'm putting that number 5 right above UFC 303. Now, 306, every single fight was good up until it got to the co-main and main event. Every fight, featured fight, main card, prelim, you had Zelhuber Ribovic, Manuel Torres, and Ignacio Bahamondes. You had Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Odi Osborne, fucking Diego Lopez versus Brian Ortega. That fight was crazy. And then you had Norma Dumont versus Irene Aldana. You had Joshua Van versus Edgar Shirez. Oh my God, that fight was insane. Raul Rosas Jr. versus Arichi Lang. The press conference was hilarious. You had Ronaldo Rodriguez just cursing out Odi Osborne in Spanish. Build up to the card was good. Presentation of the card was fucking amazing. If you watched it, if you rewatch it, you know they pulled out every single stop for this event, and it did not disappoint until we got to the co-main and main event. Remember earlier how I said at the very beginning of this video, the shitty cards got held up together by their main event and co-main event? This card was the exact opposite. Every single fight leading up to the co-main and main event had hype and momentum going from fight to fight. Wonderful performances from every single fighter. And once you get to the co-main and main event, you're like, oh my God, this is one of the best cards ever. How these last two fights, they're going to be amazing. And then you get 5 rounds of Shevchenko holding down Grasso. Then you get 5 rounds of Merab holding down O'Malley. And then your hype just dies. Your hype dies for the co-main. Then you're sitting there wondering, okay, well, maybe this main event can't be that bad. Maybe Sean O'Malley's gonna get the highlight, put him out early, and then, just a women's co-main event, right? It is what it is, happens. And then the main event sucked. The main event and co-main event were 2 cheeks from the same ass because, my God, those were terrible fights. But the featured fight was incredible. The main card was good up until the last 2. The prelims were so good. Early prelims were so good. The presentation was amazing. This was a great card. They did oversell the hype of this card, but the build up to it was pretty fun. Solid card, man. One of the best of the year. I'm putting that number 5. Number 4, another Sean O'Malley card, UFC 299. This card was stacked from top to bottom, and it had incredible fights all through it. Main event, Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera. Co-main event, Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Then you had JDM versus Gilbert Burns. MVP's debut versus Kevin Holland. Peter Yan versus Song Yadong. Gamrot versus RDA. Curtis Blades versus Jelton Almeida. Rebellis Despain knocks out Josh Parisian. Kyler Phillips puts on an amazing performance against Pedro Munoz. And watching it, you think Rebellis Despain and Kyler Phillips are going to be, top contenders. Yeah, okay, buddy. That aside, early prelims were really good. Main event was incredible. Card was really good. Stacked main card. Fun fight. Gamrot RDA fight was really fun. The Curtis Blades, Jelton Almeida finish was really entertaining to watch. DP and Benoit Saint-Denis was really good. Gilbert Burns, JDM was really good. Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera was very good. Just overall a fun fight card. Build up to the fight was really good. I was really excited going into it because I picked Chito Vera to win. If you guys don't know, Max Holloway is my favorite fighter, but Chito Vera is a close second. So you can imagine how my year has been as a fan of Chito Vera. It's not been very good. I've been having to hear it from everybody. Oh my God, Chito Vera is a decision merchant. Mr. 50-45. Sean O'Malley beat the shit out him. Figueiredo beat the shit out him. He's still my guy. I'm sorry. He's still my guy. Even in the build-up to the fight, I knew he couldn't beat Sean O'Malley. I thought he was going to get the fluke KO because he's my guy. He had aura, man. And then he just lost all of his aura after that fight. But that being said, still a really good fight, really good card. Now you know a little bit more about me. Chito Vera is one of my favorite fighters, and 299 is going in at number 4. Up next, sleeper pick. Didn't expect this one. Number 3, UFC 301. This card was fucking incredible, and I'm tired of people pretending like it wasn't. This was a great card, full of amazing fights from top to bottom. And I remember people gave this card so much shit because, oh my God, Pantoja's in a main event. Who the fuck is Steve Erceg? There's no good names on this card. Why couldn't they have put Pereira on this one? Who are some of these fighters? I've never heard of some of these fighters. Oh my God, Brazil sucks. Every time I go to Brazil, the crowd sucks. That whole card, top to bottom, was incredible. And I might be a little bit biased because this card did happen on my birthday, but fuck the bias. This card was great. The main card was so good, and people give it so much shit because there was really no ranked fighters on it, but you had Kyle Barral knock out Paul Craig, top ranked fighter in middleweight right now. Michel Pereira put on a fucking beautiful finish on Ihor Potieria. The Anthony Smith fight was anything, it was hilarious. Because seeing Vitor Petrino struggle to get out of a choke from Anthony Smith, of all people, was hilarious to watch. Jonathan Martinez versus Jose Aldo was such a good, fun fight. And then you had the main event. Oh my God, the main event was incredible. Steve Erceg Pantoja is definitely up there for one of my favorite title fights this year so far. So good, man. And you have Steve Erceg going out there and putting on the performance of a fucking lifetime against Alexander Pantoja. You had Mauricio Rufy on the card. You had Joanderson Brito on the card, putting up highlights to both of them. The Jakar Close fight was really good. Elvis Brenner versus Oralby was on there. Alessandro Costa was on there. Just amazing fights, and people give this card so much shit because there's no name value on it. But it's the prime example of that. You don't need name value to sell a good card. You just need to put on fun fights. And these fights from top to bottom, watching it was fun. It was a fun card. A lot of finishes, a lot of highlights, a lot of really good performances from really good contenders or people that are now up high ranked in their division, like Kyle Barao or Mauricio Rufy. Jose Aldo came back, had a really good fight. And then the build up too. The build up was so weird because you were like appalled and so interested at the same time, because Steve Erceg going into it had so much aura because guy was number 10, 3 fights in the UFC. Nobody knew a fucking thing about Steve Erceg. And he came in, cool guy, cool demeanor, Pantoja's cool, just so much aura because you don't know how the fight's gonna go. It could either be Steve Erceg is locked and he's gonna beat Pantoja, or Pantoja just fraud checks the number 10 ranked guy with 3 fights in the UFC. And it was the first one. Steve Erceg showed he was legit, went toe-to-toe with Pantoja, had a really close competitive fight with him. I think Pantoja won, me personally. I know a lot of people gave that fight to Erceg, but I just think that Erceg had some moments where, he looked a little green, had some low IQ moments against a guy like Pantoja, and that's what costed him the fight. But with that being said, him being as green as he was, it was still a really good showing from him and his skill set. And it showed the world that Steve Erceg has that championship skill in him. So 301 was an amazing card. Only 2 cards left, and if you were been paying attention, you know which ones they are. It is number 2, UFC 308, which just happened over this last weekend, and UFC 300 at number 1. Now, 308 was a fucking banger. Oh my goodness, this card was amazing. Only real stinkers on the card were Ankalaev and Rakic and the Bruno Silva fight, but every other fight on there was great. We had good competitive decisions, really fun decisions, great finishes, highlight reel finishes, and then the main card was just really good. Other than the Ankalaev Rakic fight, of course, but you had the Ron Murphy, Dan Ige, good fight from them. Shara Magomedov putting on an incredible performance. You had Robert Whitaker and Khamzat, Max Holloway and Ilia Topuria, which I literally just spoke about in the video before this. I don't think I was ever that excited for a UFC card other than maybe UFC 300. We'll talk more up next. What's there to say about UFC 308 that hasn't been said already? I can go on about this card for hours. Just the build-up was there, the aura was there, the fights were there, everything delivered. The presentation was good, finishes were good, highlights, just everything delivered on this card just the way I thought it would. Which is, interesting because Abu Dhabi cards tend to suck. And this was probably the best Abu Dhabi card they've done in a while. So, UFC 308, number 2. At number 1, man, y'all know I had to give it to UFC 300. Might be a little biased, but I don't think there's ever really been a card like UFC 300 where you had the level and the caliber of fighters from top to bottom be so high. It was a card full of champions fighting either other champions or really high-level contenders. You had Figueiredo versus Garbrandt opening up the card. Jim Miller and Bobby Green. Bobby Green put on an insane performance. Marina Rodriguez versus Jessica Andrade, great fight. Then you had Jalen Turner versus Moicano, insane fight. Kayla Harrison made her debut, choked out Holly Holm. Aljamain Sterling versus Calvin Kattar. Rakic versus Prohaska. Diego Lopez versus Sadiq Youssef. In the main card, you had the Bo Nickel Cody Brundage fight, but it's like I said, every really good card has to have at least 1 or 2 stinkers on it. This card only really had 1, and that was the Cody Brundage fight. Armin Tsarukyan versus Charles Oliveira, incredible fight. Then you had Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje. What do I gotta say about that fight? Y'all have seen it. Y'all have seen the finish. I've spoke about it in my other videos. But it wasn't horrible enough that it really halted the card. It was a competitive fight, and Zhang Weili is always going out there to put on a good fight, regardless of who she's fighting against. And in the main event, you had Alex Pereira put on a highlight reel knockout over Jamal Hill. Leading up to the fight was so exciting because it just felt so grand. It felt so special. It really felt like a very important moment in time. And when the card happened, you could feel the energy from just you watching it. it was amazing. Like, I really like it. You had to have been there and watched the card in real time to know what I'm talking about. But the feeling you got from watching this card, the build-up, the excitement, the hype, the press conference, the questions, like, you know, people thought Jamal Hill was gonna win. Straight up. People thought Justin Gaethje was going to murder Max Holloway. And then you had things like Jalen Turner, Renato Moicano, Prohaska versus Rakic. Well, Prohaska just got knocked out. How is he going to do against Rakic? Kayla Harrison versus Holly Holm. Well, Kara Haylerson, this is her debut. How can she do? Just a lot of questions, a lot of fun fights, a lot of great matchups. Stacked card. I really don't know how much more stacked it could have been. People wanted shit like Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 3, Jorge Masvidal to return. That was never going to happen, right? The thing about it is that when you stack cards like that, you're left with main events in the apex like Neil Magny versus Carlos Prates. But I think 300 was stacked accordingly, and I think it was probably the best card of the year. Now, remaining in the year, we have 2 cards left that haven't happened, and that is UFC 309 and 310. I think 309 is going to suck, and I think it's going to be in the bottom of the barrel when it comes to these things. No real hype fights outside the main and co-main event, and I'm using the main event very scarce because no one's really that excited to see Stipe Miocic fight John Jones, and no one's really that excited to see Charles versus Michael Chandler, a fight that already happened. But it is Charles versus Michael Chandler, so like, you can't really complain that much. Even though we've seen the fight already and we probably know how the fight's gonna go, it can go different, who knows, but not a good card. Eric Anders, Chris Weidman, Vivian Araujo, Jim Miller, Damon Jackson on the prelims. It's not looking good, guys. 310 is looking pretty stacked. On the other hand, spoke about it in my other video where I predicted the main event and the rest of the card, but that video is practically irrelevant now because Bilal Muhammad has pulled out. So as is, that card is very stacked. You have Kaya Sakura, Pantoja, Cyril Gane, Volkov, fucking Nick Diaz is coming back, Aljamain Sterling, Evloev. You have really, really good fights on here, and now we have the option of Ankalaev versus Pereira or Shavkat versus potentially Usman or JDM for the interim belt. So whichever one of those 2 outcomes, or I guess 3 outcomes happens, this card's going to be really good. We just have to really wait and see how it plays out because a card can be really stacked and good on paper, but then it ends up not doing well. But these end of the year pay-per-views are usually pretty entertaining, so you have to just wait and see. That's all I have for this video, guys. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. If you like the video, leave a like. If you like videos like these, subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications so you get notified every time I upload a new video. 99% of my viewers aren't subscribed to the channel, so if you like what you see, make sure to press that red button below. Comment if you agree with me, comment if you disagree with me, and I'm gonna see you guys in the next video. Peace.
There's no one doing it like me. Nobody.